And you're right, there are all those guys that try to draw like Mignola, and they never quite got there because they didn't have all the ingredients needed to get to that place. And of course, they're not in the same headspace. They just don't think the same way. So it's like, that looks cool. I'm going to do this as best I can. And like somebody like a Tom Grinberg, who's trying to reconcile his Neil Adams influence with his Mike Mignola goalpost. And that never really worked. That was just such a bizarre thing. And then
I found that fascinating, though. I found those Silver Surfer things, or that Grinberg did to, I think it was a Punisher that he did in that style as well. And it was kind of funny. It was kind of wacky, you know. It was because I don't know if you came to it not knowing Tom Grinberg, then maybe you would have just had a clean judgment of it being one way or the other. But if you know what he drew like 2 months ago, and then you see this, it was bizarre.
Well, and it's such a weird thing too, because Grinberg is trying to do Neil Adams when that's to some degree commercial suicide, and then he tries to embrace Mignola at a time where that was somewhat commercial suicide as well. Because I mean, only Mignola was able to pull off what he did on the specific projects that he did. Because he was another guy where he'd do a Superman issue, and probably half the audience was like, "What am I looking at? What is this? This is horrible. What's Man-Bat doing here?" You know, that kind of stuff. He just made that work in a way that nobody else could. And so trying to chase that thing that never should have worked in the first place, it's like all those guys that try to do David Lynch. You know, it's like, you need to be David Lynch if you want to try to do David Lynch, because you're not going to get there on your own.
Back to Tarantino, right?
It all comes back. But yeah, it was such an odd choice to make, to try to go from a Neil Adams to a Mike Mignola, because it kind of, I mean, I guess he had a career after that, but for the most part, he was a guy who just did whatever was lying around. Again, another one of those guys who did a bunch of Marvel Comics Presents stuff, because he was in a lane that nobody wanted to drive in. It was all off-road.
Yeah. I just remember just thinking, what's the big Tom Grinberg thing? And it's it's one of those Ra's al Ghul things, right? So, which I never read at the time. I've never been much of a Mike Barr fan, but the Breyfogle painting on his Birth of the Demon, Son of the Demon, Wife of the Demon, whatever it is, his one looks amazing. And then Grinberg comes after Breyfogle, but still defaults back to that Neil Adams mode, and just makes it look really sort of tired again. It would have been so great if those books had been of their time, rather than trying to pay homage to something that was sort of 15, 20 years earlier. Like Grinberg's one just looks so dated, whereas Breyfogle's one, I think, still stands up today. I mean, I only read it about 5 years ago, and it just looks amazing. So it's not everyone has their own road to hoe, and I appreciate that. Mike Hoffman, like, what would that guy be doing if Frank Frazetta didn't exist, you know? So yeah, I sort of feel for these guys who have obviously got drawing chops, but don't necessarily have the heart and soul to create something whole cloth, you know?
Yeah, I didn't even make it to the Grinberg one. I didn't even make it to the Breyfogle one. I was a big Jerry Bingham guy.
That was the first one.
No. Jerry Bingham did Son of the Demon, which is where they introduced where Damian Wayne was ultimately conceived. So yeah, that was the first one, and I loved Jerry Bingham, and I wanted to get a piece from him last year at Heroes Con. He's not there anymore, so it's just like I couldn't, because he's done some covers recently too, and it's like, okay, this is what he's doing for people's covers. I'm not in a place where I'm going to get any kind of commission, unfortunately. But I loved his stuff. He was a guy I absolutely adored in the 80s, and his style was so rude in the 80s. That's one of the things I liked about it, was he had that Neil Adams quality, but it had that kind of roughness of the time period where you could see him do like a G.I. Joe kind of thing or something like that. And it just didn't really survive into the 90s. The last thing I remember him doing of any real significance in comics was he did the character designs for the Malibu Protectors, Genesis line. And I dug those character designs, but even at that point, fairly early in the 90s, you could tell that everything was transitioning away from that. And so then, of course, Breyfogle did his graphic novel, and by that point, I was kind of getting out of Batman, so I never got to the Breyfogle. And I think the Grinberg must have been after the Breyfogle, like you were saying. Yeah. I've never experienced it. All I'm doing is I'm picturing, again, that Mignola influenced stuff and some of the stuff he did where it was more Adams in the 80s. And he's just a guy who did covers for various things, and you're like, okay, that guy did a cover, that's nice for you, good for you guys, and kind of moving on. Just never resonated,
But what if you come across it cheap, similar to, can't remember what we're talking about earlier on. Those Neil Adams, those Alan Davis Thanos books, they're stunning. So if you come across them, and if you come across the Breyfogle in its original format, it's worth picking up for the art alone, because I missed Breyfogle at the time when everyone everyone loves their Grant and Breyfogle Batman, and I just see it all as a bit of a wasted opportunity. I see, going back to inkers, I see Steve Mitchell's inks as being just like kind of shoddy. The whole thing feels incredibly fast, and I've got a few of them, and I like a few of them, but overall it never had the impact on me that it did on so many who I guess were lucky enough to read it as it was coming out, as a bit of a breath of fresh air after what preceded it. But those Thanos annual graphic novels as well, those are fantastic, and worth picking up cheap, if only for the art. The story makes no sense to me because I don't have any of that I don't have all that Jim Starlin continuity in my head, but those 3 books look beautiful. Oh, and in fact, there was a Guardians of the Galaxy one that preceded it that was somehow tied in as well. But they're all worth picking up for the art alone.
Yeah, and the problem is having a background in all that cosmology. Part of what made it so resonant in its day was the finality. Like, it actually meant something. It was an epic, and it came to a conclusion, and people died, and the universe moved past these events. And then starting for when they started bringing all those characters back in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, you were undoing the legacy. You know, what was great was that you told the story, and now you're going back and trying to tell the story again, but different and not as good. And that's one of the problems that I have. Now, the Breyfogle thing I'd like to check out because I like Breyfogle's painted artwork, and he didn't do enough of that. He did covers and the odd poster and stuff, but there isn't a lot of interior painting by him, and that I'd like that because I think that sort of abstract impressionist thing that he did with pen and ink works better as a painting, and I'd kind of like to see that. I think there's Birth of the Demon that he did that on, but I never tumble upon that in general, much less on sale. And then Breyfogle's another one of those guys where, you know, coming up in the Neil Adams, Jim Aparo school, I just never embraced him. I think a lot of the people who love Breyfogle love him because they were super excited about Batman comics in that time period when the movie came out, and that's just like the look of Batman in that time period. Everybody was he was the closest they had to a star artist that time period, because they, you know, when you got Breyfogle versus like an aging near blind Jim Aparo and Graham Nolan, it's like, Breyfogle's going to stand out in those. And I love Breyfogle stuff on other things. I just never really appreciated it on Batman. Like, he did a one shot of Prime and Captain America of all the combinations. But he drew one of the best looking Captain Americas I've ever seen. And he also did a short story where he wrote it as well for Marvel Fanfare. And I'd love to have seen him do something more substantial with Captain America. I really got into that. And I think it was him getting to work out some of that bodybuilder, you know, metaphysique stuff that with a more mainstream character than, you know, the bravura stuff. So I would have loved to have seen more Cap. And whereas Batman with all the cape stuff, it just didn't work as well for me. I've never liked a really big, brawny Batman and with a gigantic Liefeldian thighs. I just never could get into the Batman stuff.
It's interesting you mentioned Nolan, because as in Graham Nolan, because his stuff did nothing for me. Like, so I was at exactly the age where those Sam Keith and Kelly Jones covers on Nightfall really got my attention. And if ever there was a case of like false advertising in comics, the difference between a Sam Keith in a hurry cover and then like Aparo and Nolan inside was quite shocking to me at like 16, 17. I got the whole thing, and but I was just baffled by it, and I'm still sort of baffled today by the fact that people have such a fondness for it, because I've got a fondness for the covers, but I don't remember the stuff inside at all. But then post Nightfall, Night Quest, Night's Rise, Night, post all of that, when Nolan and Dixon were on Detective Comics, the editorial choice was that every arc or issue Nolan would have, or every story basically, Nolan would have different inkers. So you had Nolan Palmer, Nolan Barreto, Nolan Senkovic, which I've still got. Those are pretty great. Nolan Jansen, I think, does one. But it's really interesting to me that a big publisher, the focus almost seemed to be on the inkers, bringing something different to the pencils. And I can't think of many examples in comics where they've taken that sort of approach of like, well, the bones are okay, let's throw something on top of it that's going to bring a little bit of life to it and do it different every arc. And just to finish the thought, there's a cover which is Kevin Nolan inking Graham Nolan, and it's got like a 1 of 1 logo on it, so it's around 615 or something like that, or 515. But it's an amazing combination. It's an amazing Kevin Nolan ink job on a really decent layout. out. And Kevin, there's a newspaper. It's got a little drawing of Graham Nolan, and it's got a little drawing of Kevin Nolan on it. I was looking at it just the other day. But yeah, funny that the second, third biggest publisher in comics at the time would take their main character and leave it to the inkers to make it look good.
Yeah, as I get older, I appreciate, as you mentioned, the journeymen, the guys who you tell them what you want in a story and they're going to draw it and it's going to be clear. And you tell them that there needs to be a certain kind of car on this panel. They're going to draw the car. They're going to draw the telephone. They're going to draw everything you ask them to draw. And those are the kind of guys that writers love, because everything they put on that page is going to be visible. It's going to be communicated. They love that stuff. And I respect that more now than I used to as a kid, because I wanted that flash. I wanted that pizzazz. So for me as a kid, Graham Nolan was really one of the most boring artists in all of comics. And the look of the Batman books in that time period, I mean, I didn't really like the writing on those books at that time period either, but really the art, because Mike Manley did some of his worst work ever on that.
That's right.
On a Batman title as well in that time period. And then Chuck Dixon, I thought, was the best Batman writer in that period. I think he's a really good scripter, or was in his prime, and he was definitely doing more interesting stuff with Batman, but he was constantly working with Graham Nolan, the most boring artist in comics. And so there was nothing for me to hook myself onto. So I made it through the Nightfall chapters. And then once it hit 500 and they'd reach their landmark, I'm like, okay, I'm done. I'm out. And I stayed out for the most part. I would pick up, like when Kelly Jones came in and started doing interiors, I picked up some of that stuff. But for the most part, I had the easiest time possible dropping the Batman stuff. Meanwhile, with Superman, I jumped on during Reign. I managed to mostly stay away from the Doomsday stuff, but I jumped on for Reign to Superman. And I still kind of lingered for a while because they had Tom Grummett and Barry Kitson and John Bogdanov, and they had all these guys who were really doing cool, interesting stuff. So that was a book, and the writing on most of those didn't do much for me. It was really, the art was strong enough, and my interest in what they were doing with the franchise was strong enough to where I kind of wanted to stay away for Superman. And they basically had to shoo me off with one lame event after another, one stupid gimmick cover after another. Here's the hot new villain that we're introducing that's going to become nothing. So that was just kind of a night and day. It's like Batman, I couldn't get off those titles fast enough. And then Superman, they really had to wean me off by not being particularly good comic books, despite what the Superman fans would tell you. But at least visually, they looked good. And the Batman books, I thought, just looked so drab. And then, like I said, some of those guys I've come to appreciate. Again, like you mentioned Barreto. And him inking Graham Nolan was kind of interesting, but I wasn't a huge fan of either of those guys. But as I look back, I can see what incredible work Barreto was doing and how beautiful the inks and everything were. And I really come to appreciate him more looking backwards. I still think Nolan's boring as hell. And he's done a few cons in town that I've been to, and occasionally I've thought about, well, every now and again you want sort of that kind of retro vibe, that kind of comic strip vibe. Maybe I'll look into his stuff, but his quotes were ridiculous for what he puts on the page. And also he just has that toxic masculine vibe about him to where I would see him at a show and I'd just be repelled by his presence, much less his prices and what he was putting on the page. And how many damn times can you draw Bane? For God's sake, man, he's got nothing else.
I mean, that's obviously his breakout thing. I mean, I picked up not too long ago. I had got this annoying tendency for suddenly deciding that I want a comic after it turns out that the CGC Brigade have decided that it's key, and I can't afford it anymore. That Alan Davis Wild Ways New Mutants annual with the pink cover, first Psylocke in X-Men or something, and so that was expensive. And then Dave Gibbons Brave and the Bold 200, that was expensive because it was the first Katana. So, who cares? Like, you're buying this for the wrong reason. But I did decide when I was on a Eduardo Barreto kick, I decided that I fancied picking up Vengeance of Bane, and of course it's a bloody fortune as first Bane. It was always quite expensive, but most comics that were expensive at the time, i.e. back in the 90s when I was in retail, are now worth buttons. Like, nobody really cares about them. So I didn't expect that people were going to be after quite a bit of money for that. But I picked up a second print of that, long and short, a recent reprint, and just quite enjoyed seeing Barreto's inks over the top. And then I ended up buying Shadow comics by him, which look amazing. Stories are boring, and they're by a writer who leaves a bad taste in the mouth anyway. But I always saw Eduardo Barreto as being like a second, like, we can't get Garcia Lopez, so who's our next best draftsman? And so they'd get Eduardo Barreto to come in and fill in. But yeah, it's interesting seeing his inks really are amazing and do lift a penciler in a way that is kind of unexpected for someone whose style on its own isn't so remarkable. You don't expect a penciler whose style is like functional and gets the job done to suddenly lift somebody else's artwork in a way he does with Nolan.
Yeah, and I love Killer Croc, and Bane was very much Killer Croc version 2.0. But that one story is such a strong origin that I completely get why people embraced Bane the way they did, because it's just a really good package. Good. The artwork it tells the story well. Barreto gives it that little extra polish, and Dixon's just cooking. But he also had the template to work off of too. He's like, oh yeah, I know who this guy is. I remember the first time they tried to get this guy over, and and he's not as interesting of a version of that character, not visually as interesting, because I think that. But anyway, but it's still a good package, because it's a good story. Yeah, it is funny too, because like you said, you had Jose Luis Garcia Lopez on Atari Force, and that was such a fantastic looking book, and they wanted that to be a hit so bad that never really was, and then Barreto follows him, and then if you got Perez on New Teen Titans, followed by Jose Luis Garcia Lopez, folled by Ed Barreto, and I think
followed by Barreto again.
Yeah, and it's just like it was a curse, because this is a guy who I think was getting a lot of positive attention when he was doing Superman at a time when people were desperate for them to finally move past the Kurt Swan years, and certainly in direct comparison to Kurt Swan, Barreto is very contemporary by comparison, but also I think his lane was always retro type stuff. He always was good at doing that, again, that comic strip kind of vibe, that 50s, 60s kind of vibe, and they kept putting him on books where you really needed somebody with an edge to them, somebody who could bring that 80s quality, and he couldn't. So he's such a good artist that they kept putting on the wrong projects. He should not have been on Atari Force, should not have been on New Teen Titans, and it just seemed to be a curse to him, because he never got the attention he could have gotten if he had been put on projects that better suited his style and better suited his strengths. He was never going to be the teen book guy, and they kept putting him on the damn teen book.
Yeah. I heard, I was talking to somebody about, I sort of felt bad, because I really had dismissed him as being a secondhand Garcia Lopez, and then when I read this, I'm not shy about owning my kind of like, I can't believe I thought this guy was boring, whether it's on social media or anyway, it is what it is. But when I came to his work, I think it was primarily because of his work on the Shadow, and his use of like sort of spatter and dry brush on certain panels on the Shadow, and the way he sort of conjures that sort of period. That stuff looks amazing when it's not sort of boring talking heads of people in period dress. When the action gets started, it's amazing. And somebody, and I can't remember who it was now, but I ended up chatting with somebody in DMs on Twitter who pointed out to me that they had some sort of background on Barreto, and his lane was more like Jorge Sefino. Like, he wanted to be doing like proper full-on action. Like he was I don't want to say like a guns and ammo. He's not like a Chuck Dixon kind of, but his perfect project would have been a Chuck Dixon type, like him and Chuck Dixon doing Vigilante or something would have been the kind of thing that was right in his wheelhouse. But he kept because his style was so clean when it was clean, that was what that's what DC lent into, when actually there was a gritty aspect to his style that he used on the Shadow at times, and that seemed to get overlooked. And like you say, he was just never on the right book for the style that he wanted to be drawing in, it seems.
Well, he's already working with the Titans editor. Vigilante sounds like the lane, like literally like the Adrian Chase Vigilante, good, clean, realistic, grounded type stuff. I know it's a cursed book because of the writer, but one of my favorite things that he did was Martian Manhunter American Secrets. I think that Steve Olive did the coloring on that too, and especially on that paper where those rich inks are so, like, black hole blacks. Just a fantastic looking book. He did Mickey Spillane's Mike Danger for Techno Comics, which is cursed in a whole different way, but that was a great looking book. I know he did a pinup or something for Sin City, and something along those lines. That true crime kind of thing would have been awesome, and he just never got that chance. Also, I think he could have been great on something like a Tarzan. If you have to do superhero stuff again, go retro. Instead of killing off the Justice Society in 0 Hour, do a 40s or 50s set book with them and have him draw that. There's so many things you could have done with that guy, but like you said, he was a good guy to have on something like The Shadow, especially because they had gone the extreme 80s route with Kyle Baker and Andy Helfer and trying to do that way out there type of stuff. And then they realized that the demographic for that book wasn't what they were targeting with that type of material. So it's like, okay, let's do it pulpy. And he's a perfect fit for that type of material. And once again, working working with a cursed writer. But yeah, I personally think he'd have been better on Doc Savage. I think that you still needed a little bit more of an impressionistic quality for the Shadow. A Brayfolker would have been great on something like the Shadow. Obviously, he's not going to downgrade from Batman to the Shadow, but he'd have been perfect for something like that. And then I think Rod Wiggum was doing the Doc Savage stuff, and that was solid enough. But I do think that Barreto, that was his lane. He should have been somewhere like that. He probably could have gotten some Punisher stuff in too, but I don't think that would be that interesting because I think that the retro stuff doesn't work for him the way that it would work with some of the other properties we talked about.
Yeah, he was so good at the period stuff that it would seem a shame not to incorporate that into whatever he's doing, but let him cut loose a little bit.
Yeah, I don't know if you, like a John Carter or something, like do some kind of an ERB time of thing would be good for him as well. Get some Tarzan action in there.
Yeah. I was really struck by how good some of that Shadow stuff is, and how he manages to pull off some of that action. I think again on the Jose Garcia Lopez thing, I think did Barreto do some of like Road to Perdition as well?
I don't think so.
That was like Steve Lieber, Jose Luis Garcia Lopez, and I'm pretty sure there's like Barreto on that as well. Or maybe I'm thinking of another Piranha book.
Yeah, no, you might be right because I'm thinking of the original Road to Perdition, but I want to say they did some kind of a sequel or something, didn't they?
Yeah, they did like 3 small books, smaller, like the classic kind of Piranha Press format, like Brooklyn Dreams. They did that. They did what was it called? Return to the Road to Perdition, I think. And Garcia Lopez did one, and I had it, and I don't have it anymore because it was really constrained into these like 4-panel grids. It was this weird thing, in the same way as like comics done for digital look kind of shite because they're all split in 2 so that you can read them like on an iPad turned sideways. These little Road to Perdition books seem to have some kind of editorial mandate of like everything has to be 4-panel pages, and I can only take so much of that. I can't read books where the layouts are so restricted by the format. So anyway, but I'm sure Barreto did one of those. I'm gonna have to look it up. But yeah, poor old Barreto.
And I'm a huge fan of the 9-panel grid. You know, Giffen completely won me over on that, and I've enjoyed some of the other artists who do that format. But there's a density to the 9-panel grid that's way different than a 4-panel grid. 4-panel, like I never could embrace those Piranha Press books because there was such a half measure. They're not paperbacks, but they're not comic books. They don't fit in the same kind of racks correctly. Who was this for? Like I enjoyed the Paradox Press stuff with like the big books where they went into more of a magazine dimensions, but square bound. That I think worked, and I think it clear that it worked because they did so many of those things. Somebody was buying those books, me included, but I just could never bring myself to buy. I just don't like the format. I don't want my artwork to be smaller and smaller. It's kind of cute. When as a kid, I'd buy some of those paperback reconfigurations of comic books like they did with Star Wars and some of that kind of stuff, but only because we didn't have trade paperbacks. Once we had trade paperbacks, I wanted nothing to do with that type of storytelling. And to intentionally inflict a 4-panel grid on an artist just because that's the format you're shooting for. No, please. I can totally, I don't even have to look at the books. Just your descriptions of it tells me all I need to know about how little I want to touch those things and validates why I always avoided them because I couldn't articulate like what was it about them that made me never buy any of those books. I don't own any of them. I've never bought any of them. For something about it repelled me, and surely that was part of the problem.
Yeah, so I bought a few of them. So Brooklyn Dreams we spoke about on Blue Sky, and there's a new printing coming from Dark Horse. Glenn Barr's art is amazing, and I'll be interested to see what format Dark Horse are going for, because IDW, when they reprinted it, they respected the original format quite closely. So it's like a half letter size in UK A5 size, like a slightly larger paperback size format. So I'll be interested to see what Dark Horse does, and if they manage to land on a format that makes the book sellable, because it's black and white and grayscale, and IDW managed to find a massive price point for it. But aside from that, there's one by, oh man, the guy's name's going to escape me. There was a Jay Lee looking guy. There was another crime book, and it was the guy who did like the cover for
Randy DeBurke, baby.
Who? Sorry,
Randy DeBurke.
Randy DeBurke. Thank you. So Randy DeBurke did a 3-issue crime thing, and that looked amazing. But again, that format is like you can barely open it to actually read it unless you want to destroy it. But Randy DeBurke did one that was great. and the Brooklyn Dreams were both great. Those were the standouts from all of those like tiny format Paradox Press books that were doomed by aiming at a market that didn't exist of people that wanted to read on a train without looking like they were reading comics.
Yeah, Randy DeBurke's one of those guys that never seemed to do anything, but I always enjoyed his stuff because he was this bizarre hybrid of Paul Gulacy and Bill Sienkiewicz. And again, that combination isn't going to happen organically. Like somebody has to have that, internalize that and spat that out as one single individual. No, that's never going to be the style of the time or anything. But I really enjoyed his work for that brief period of time that he was doing stuff, and then he just seemed to vanish into the ether once the market collapsed. But even before then, he was mostly doing like covers and stuff. I think he did covers for the Ray at one point. He did some Who's Who entries. He did a Black Canary strip in Action Comics Weekly. Just that's weird little odd stuff. For. Yeah, but I really enjoyed his stuff. So when you were talking, once you started describing the artist, like, oh yeah, I forgot he did that. I never, even the shops I worked at, we didn't even stock that stuff. Like people didn't order it. So it very rarely did I even get to like toss through it before throwing it into a customer's box because there was just no interest ever in that material. I do want to ask you though, they've got the Moonshadow collection in this month's order catalog. And I've got that whole Epic thing where because I was reading Epic stuff in the mid 80s and that was one of the Epic books, those ads were omnipresent. They were always advertising each other's books in Epic. And so like just that imagery always grabs me. And I think DeMatteis has said good things about that. I think he might think that's one of his masterpieces or his masterpiece, for instance. Have you ever read Moonshadow? Is it something that I should actually investigate? Because I don't think I've ever read a single solitary issue of this thing.
So everything comes back to everything. Kevin Nolan inks it. Kevin Nolan letters it, which makes it a special occasion in that regard. Story wise, similar. I read Moonshadow before I read Brooklyn Dreams, and they're both vehicles for a lot of autobiography, kind of shoved into workshopped into kind of fiction. I don't know if you ever read DeMatteis' Seekers into Mystery, which is a Vertigo book that he did with. It was like 4 issues by an artist, Michael Zulli. Then there was a John J. Muth issue. Then there was 4 issues by Glenn Barr. Then a John J. Muth, and then something like that. But those were my first 3 DeMatteis books, and they were all of a kind, which was a lot. You could see the thematic overlap. Some of the characters were named the same. So I sort of lumped them all in together. Brooklyn Dreams is the most direct kind of autobiographical thing and the most entertaining because he's half Catholic, half Jewish, and it's a really entertaining story. Moonshadow is gorgeous. I bought the deluxe hardcover when it came out a couple of years ago, and I sold it about 6 months ago without having reread it because it's super dense. But I would say it's worth experiencing just at least once because the art is amazing. It's John J. Muth, and when he gets tired, Kent Williams steps in for an odd panel or page. And then it's all tied together by like immaculate Kevin Nolan lettering. And when he can't do it, it's one of his heroes who steps in. It's Gaspar Saladino does the letters when Nolan can't. So as a whole package, it's pretty amazing. But it's for want of a better word, it's kind of like an airy-fairy J.M. DeMatteis. It's all about his philosophy, and so it's autobiographical combined with his philosophy. And looking back, I realised that what my mum meant was, and so yeah, it depends where you are. It's kind of a magical realism type thing that looks amazing, and I'm very glad that I read it when I read it, and I'd recommend reading it at least once. Does that help?
Yeah, it does help, but it also hurts because I'm a lettering nerd, and Kevin Nolan doing the lettering is a really good draw for me, which I don't think most people would be. I was like, he's only doing the lettering. He's like, yeah, I want to see Kevin Nolan lettering, over an entire project. That's intriguing to me. But at the same time, the Brooklyn Dreams is pretty much pre-sold. Like they would have to have a really outrageous price for me to not get that because I feel like that's him doing his Neil Simon. So that's just so much in my lane. And it's like, okay, I'm there for that. No worries. As long as you don't completely price me out. And then I've always had an aversion to Seekers. And that's another one that he brings up a lot in social media. I think it's worth it. It's very, intensely connected to him even to this day. But I don't necessarily care about his philosophy of life and particularly about spirituality and mysticism. That's not something I really need from him. I tend to like his stuff when it's a little more grounded than that. When he gets really far off into the woo woo-woo, that's when he starts to lose me. And so that's always been my aversion to Moonshadow, is exactly what you said. It's like, oh, the fairy tale, frou-frou type stuff. So it's like, okay, the autobiography, magical realism. I'm tugging back and forth on these things. It's like, I feel like I'm going to buy it and eventually read it and not enjoy it and appreciate how it's a super personal project and why he would love it so much, and completely also understand why the person that I am would not appreciate it. But Kevin Nolan Nuthering, though, dude, Kevin Nolan Nuthering, it's like, is that going to give me? It might. I may not be immune to that particular draw.
So just to map it, I would say Brooklyn Dreams is the most straight on kind of it doesn't bog you down in his theology. Seekers at the other end is all about his theology and his philosophy, and then Moonshadow is somewhere in between, but leaning towards Brooklyn Dreams. It's a big fairy tale that if you've read the other two, you can't get away from how much of his philosophy is in it. But on its own, you're not reading it thinking, oh Christ, stop banging this drum. Yeah, I get it, we're all one. Or it's not that kind of thing. I think Miller described it as being like a fairy tale for grown-ups and this kind of thing. And it does stand really well in that regard. The only thing I will say is there's a bookend, there's an epilogue that was done years later, and that's inconsistent with the earlier stuff. So there's a thing called Farewell Moonshadow, which was like a prestige format, and that's very much Jan DeMatteis being able to cut loose in a more Seekers-y kind of way using Moonshadow. But if you sort of take that out of the equation, the 12 issues of Moonshadow are really good in their own right, and make for a good sort of fairy tale for grown-ups, like Miller said.
I think that was literally like the copy from the the ads and stuff. It's like, because she said, it's like, oh yeah, that sounds very familiar. Yeah, I'm probably sold. I'm probably going to go ahead and pick it up. Again, there's that weird sense of scarcity, like we were talking about earlier on. It's like, how long do we have a comic industry at this point? Like, do I get a third chance at Moonshadow or a fourth chance at Moonshadow at this point, or is this the last time this is going to come around that I can pick this up if I want to pick it up? I don't know. Like you were talking about before, I don't know. I don't think we were recording at the time, but like the Kickstarters, and I've been very averse to having anything to do with that. I've not signed up for any of those yet. Mac's done some. I have not, because I want the industry to remain where it's been for most of my time as a fan. I want a catalog. I want comic shops. I want certain books that are the official books that got published, and then you could easily map that onto like Grand Comics database or Comic Vine or whatever database you want to map it onto. And like, these are the real books that really got printed, and this is when they got printed, and this is when they were available to the public, and yada yada yada. And especially with the Diamond bankruptcy, there's that destabilization where I just don't see that you're going to have one source come in and be the market and define the market the way the Diamond did for decades. I feel like Penguin Random House and Lunar and all these other people, they're not sharing numbers with each other. There's nobody who's fully effectively aggregating all the information about how many copies are being put out there and when was the street date. There's just not that level of consistency anymore.
There's no barometer for the health of the industry.
Exactly. And there's no reason to think that somebody like a Penguin Random House, if the bookstore market starts to shun elements of comics, they don't just say, this isn't really doing anything for us, we're going to drop this, and then you don't have a distribution network anymore because this publisher is not really into it anymore. It's not. I don't think Penguin Random House isn't owned by the Disney conglomerate or anything, right? They're still a separate entity.
Yeah, not as far as I'm aware.
Yeah, and Warner still has Warner Books, I think, or some publisher that's still essentially Warner Books to get their stuff out if they ever needed to. But again, that's to bookstores. That's not necessarily the comic shops. And I just feel like we're regressing back to the 70s and 80s where you would have these regional books where they used to talk about that on Comic Book Kayfabe, where you would go to certain areas of the country and they'd be well stocked in book X because that's where they were based and that's where they were able to get some kind of a toehold in. But if you're not in that region, those books don't exist for you essentially. And you're going to have these ghost books where you have to wonder, does this book even exist? Like, it'll be on a website somewhere where they talk about this thing and they'll have information on it, but is it a real book or is it something that somebody just put up there and nobody was able to dispute it? As you mentioned with the Kickstarters, I'm just opposed to the model. I'm not going to be a patron where I'm actually paying for you to produce the work. You need to do the work and then take my money when it's time time to actually publish it. But you need to have your shit together enough so that I know this is a real thing. I'm not a speculator. I'm not an investor. I just want to buy a goddamn book and read it, okay? I don't want to be participating in this creative experience that may or may not ever come to fruition. That's your job. My job is to give you money for the finished product. But I don't know how long I'll be able to support this medium in the way that I want to support it by actually having physical books to buy without it going to that place. And there's a bunch of these people, we talked about it a bit on social media, where there's a bunch of people cheering about Diamond because they're already Kickstarter guys. They're often ideologues. And so it suits their worldview. It's like, yeah, well, the way we're doing it is the way of the future. And you guys are stuck in the past and you need to support my deal, Majiggy. And it's like you said, there's practical realities to prevent that from being a universal model. You again, the whole thing with like Image, there was a minute there where it wasn't certain that Image Comics would continue to exist in the UK market or in the European market because Lunar cannot ship a box to across the Atlantic without it being so expensive that people can't afford to sell them and at a profit. They would lose money, selling them at cover price and stuff. And thankfully, the distribution has worked out to where Diamond UK is still going to be able to push that stuff out into that market. But that's not that infrastructure is not going to serve something like a Kickstarter or an Indiegogo or whatever. So there is a question of, do we continue to have these physical books available to us in the way that we've been able to just take for granted for decades now? How long is that going to be viable for? I still like these artifacts. I still like holding a book in my hands. I don't want everything to be digital, but also how long is that going to be viable, especially without a international distribution network in place?
Yeah, I mean, I hope it lasts. I've also got no room, so there's a little bit of me where if it went away, my wife certainly wouldn't complain. But yeah, I mean, I like doing as much as I can to support a publisher. So I appreciate that with a one-off project, me buying it after it's published doesn't help with this book, but it potentially helps with the next book. With a series, I can buy issues 1 and 2, and my retailer knows to order plenty of 5 and 6 because that's the way comic ordering works, months in advance or what have you. So that's my version of supporting the creators. What I'm not down for is I'll buy your $10 book and pay £30 for it because I've got to pay more shipping to get it to the UK. I think one of the things that could potentially help Kickstarters and the like would be if print on demand improved to the point where you could reliably sell something. Like, I don't know if you've ordered any of these books from like Kyle Baker, like brilliant, all-time brilliant cartoonist, is publishing books via Amazon that don't actually have his name on it. I don't know if he's trying to get out paying alimony or trying to avoid a tax man or something, but he's got these books. There's 2 volumes of a book called Decathlon that he did. There's another one that he did, and he's publishing them via Amazon. And so they turn up, you get a hardcover, you pop it out the packet, the paper's all pre-warped, it's that kind of cheap paper that sucks up it's almost like it's those beads that you get in a pair of trainers, sucks up any moisture in the room and is instantly warped. And you open it, you get blank end pages because it's the cheapest possible version of a hardcover book. Sounds good, hardcover, and then you get it and you can't even close it properly because the paper's so warped. And it's just really disappointing. And then you get loads of great Carl Baker art and find yourself thinking, why the fuck isn't this being published by somebody who knows what they're doing? And then on top of that, this book Decathlon that he did was 2 volumes of a series that never went any further. So you get book 1, you get book 2, and then never see book 3. So what's the point? But I can see a version where print on demand gets to the point where you can do it reliably with the end product, whether it's printed in Canada, China, US, is consistent enough that you can guarantee your customers they're getting a decent product, and then you just buy that book and you pay local shipping rather than international shipping. But that doesn't seem to be the reality yet, and certainly not with these Amazon books. Baker's not the only one. I can't remember who else.
Rick Veitch has been doing some of that stuff with Max Immortal.
Exactly,
yeah. And I've not done anything with Amazon. You're not selling it for me at all, though. I don't buy nice quality hardcovers to put on the shelf to be of that caliber. It's like I need something quality controls. Like that's why I want there to be publishers and I want there to be distributors. I want people who know what they're doing to do a good job. Editors too, yes. And God, some of these books I pick up that clearly need an editor and don't have one, and the devaluation of editors. Anyway, I have picked up a few.
They'll go after inkers, but there'll be more of them employed for longer.
I have picked up a few print-on-demand things. There's there's one, I can't remember off the top of my head their name, but they're within the United States, and they have a website, and they do reference materials for like Golden Age public domain characters and stuff, like a who's who kind of thing, or a Marvel handbook is really what they look like. And I've picked up a few odds and sides along those lines, and some of that stuff looks pretty good. Like they do a solid job. If the real tells is that they're almost too good, like they'll have these really like heavy stock cardstock covers that just aren't really economically feasible for a proper publisher, and they're so rigid and strong that it's like they fake because they're too good, you know? So I've had good experiences with some print on demand, but I'm sure that the bad stuff's out there, and you've just discussed that stuff that I don't want to approach. And of course, Amazon is going to be the worst version of that, and that's no surprise to me. That's why I avoid buying stuff from Amazon as much as I can, as hard as it's getting to be to do that.
Yeah, the best thing that I can think of to describe of like this kind of paper quality is, you know, there's like an epic martial law 48 pager or something, and those all come pre-warped from where they've just absorbed all the water in the atmosphere. And it's that kind of thing where you can't actually flick through it because the paper sort of clumps together, not in like a moist way, but just in like a warped way, and it's all sort of crunchy sounding and stuff. It's that. But I feel like there's probably a thing where if you're in the area where the publisher stroke creator is, I guess you're more likely to get a product that they've at least seen. Whereas Carl Baker, not to cause him problems, Carl Baker may well have seen a version of that came out of a US print-on-demand factory printer. That isn't the same as my one that came from the UK, or someone else's in France, or someone else's in Canada. So it could be that he's seen a version of it that looks great. It's just my version that looks shit.
Yeah, and I hadn't even thought about regional variances like that. That makes sense to me. But I'm still not going to order any of that stuff off of Amazon to find out whether or not they're as crappy here as they are there.
Yeah. I mean, the Rick Veitch stuff, I mean, I've not heard anyone complain about it, but yeah, that's a lot of sort of standalone kind of stuff, and I think that's slightly better. But the idea of somebody serializing, like, here's my 5-part book, oh, it didn't sell very well, I'm jumping off with volume 2. It's like, you know, I've just paid like £18 a volume for some shit books that I was hoping was at least going to finish the story. And so that's sort of quite that was pretty disappointing, to the point where I didn't pick up the next thing he did, because I don't know if it's a one-off, because I don't know anything about it. It's not even got his name on it. It's really strange.
Yeah, Veitch is somebody who has so much experience with such a variety of publishers at different levels, and I think he probably has more quality control, where Baker, for the most part, has always worked with established publishers who do the actual packaging for him. So it does make sense that Veitch might have a better idea of what he needed to do to make sure his stuff came out correct.
Yeah, you would hope so. But yeah, I feel bad for Baker. The books look amazing, but similar to Kickstarter, I supported Dwellings as that was coming out, all 6 issues, but that was an established publisher via Kickstarter. But this whole idea of throwing $30-40 at some Kickstarter for an issue because it comes with some stickers and a badge. It's like, I'm a grown up, I don't want stickers and a badge.
Yeah, and I don't care for a billion variant covers. I've never been the guy who's going to buy that stuff, even when it came from a regular publisher. And that's a major issue for me too, is that I don't go to a comic shop and I don't take some rinky-dink 10% discount off of my books. I get my stuff through mail order. I get a good quality discount. I'm a guy who spent years as a retailer. I know what these books actually cost. I know what I would like to pay. And so I do not pay anything remotely resembling cover price. And so when you've got these guys who are cutting out distribution, they're basically going to get printed themselves, they're doing everything themselves, and they want to charge me not only cover price, but a premium over cover price for an individual comic book with, again, all these stupid quasi bells and whistles. I'm just not there for that. I would much rather like the Jim Starlin stuff. I've either gotten it secondhand through like eBay, or, you know, he had a softcover version of one of the Dreadstar books at the last con that I went to that he was at. So I just bought it directly from him. And I'm okay with paying cover price at a con. There's no shipping. I've not pre-ordered. I don't get any benefits because I didn't do anything I was supposed to do to get a discount. And again, I know that it's going to cost me even more if I go through the whole Kickstarter process. So I'd much rather just pay retail directly to the creator but that's my line, right? It's always going to be some premium that you're going to have to pay by going through the Kickstarter, Indiegogo, or whatever. And I'm just not down for it. I'd almost rather do the catch as catch can. It's just like, I'll catch these guys at a show where I just won't get the book. Like they did that Big Bang tabloid edition, the Treasury edition, that Cosmic Lion did. And it's them doing a jam anthology with the Big Bang characters. And I caught those guys at a con, and I'd heard a little bit about this, and I bought it, and I'm happy to have it. They're going to do one for the 1963 characters. I'll hopefully catch them at that con, but I'm not going to go and sign up for to get all the emails and for them to solicit me all the Comics Gator stuff that's coming out from those guys. I just don't care. I'm not doing it. I did want to point out too, because I'd researched.
It's not Comics Gator stuff through Cosmic Lion, is it?
Probably. Yeah, I think they have a website. You can order direct from them because they're an actual publisher. They're in the previous catalog. So it used to be like they were a little bit more of one of those pop-up kind of things, but they're becoming more of a legitimate publisher. So yeah, you can just go on the website and order their stuff potentially. I don't know. Again, transatlantic, I don't know about that, but locally you can do that. I want to say that the print-on-demand guys that I've had good experiences with are Indie Planet. So I just want to give them a quick shout out. And I can vouch for their stuff because everything I've gotten from them, I've gotten from a few different publishers because I figured, well, I'm already buying some stuff. Let me try out a few more things. And I've been happy with everything that's come out so far. Again, the tell is that they're better than they're supposed to be, as opposed to worse.
Okay. Yeah. No, I got the Cosmic Lion, they do the Grendel read-through podcast, or one of the two guys on it is Eli, who's the publisher for Cosmic Lion. So I'm aware of them. I didn't know about the Big Bang comics. I knew the Wizard. The Big Bang comics I'm sort of turned off by. I'll defer to you having read it, but the one by, what's his name? The Letterer. It was such a bad book. Who did the 1963 annual.
Don Simpson.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was horrible.
So the Don Simpson thing turns me off the idea of anyone trying to do any more 1963.
Well, I think an argument could be made that Don Simpson really wasn't trying to do 1963. That book so quickly pivots to his creator-owned stuff and his Megaton Man and Bizarre Heroes and all that kind of stuff. It really did feel like a bait and switch fairly quickly. Like he might have intended to start out doing it, but I think especially once a publisher got involved, once Fantagraphics was in there and the potential for lawsuits was there, it pivoted so hard away from 1963 that I really feel like that was a scam almost. Like I'm upset about that because I was sold a bill of goods and that book did not deliver on that by intent. Like there was no way that was ever really going to be what it said it was going to be. So that was frustrating to me. So just putting that out there. These guys are actually, and again, these guys aren't going to finish 1963. They're calling it, I think, or some variation on the 1963 annual, but they're not going to have Spawn and Wildcats or whatever was going to be in the original one. They don't have the script portion that Jim Valentino says he's got. So it's going to just be an anthology featuring those characters and really not even all the characters. I'm sure it's only going to be the ones that this set has largely uncontested rights to, even though there's been issues for him trying to publish it himself. So that's just going to be like the Big Bang thing, where it's just going to be an anthology and it's of varying quality and I think mostly they get this, I think they get like students at art schools and stuff to do this stuff. So it's almost like a thesis that they were doing. So it'll be fun. It'll be cute. It'll be more entertaining than the Don Simpson Drek, but it's not going to be anything really substantial. But I will say that Treasury edition, not only was it well put together, it's a good looking, attractive book based on the talent you have available to you, but they gave me a hollow foil sticker of Cosmic Lion when I was getting it. And I also got a couple of packs of trading cards. They actually produced trading cards of the Big Bang characters that came in a foil wrapper, just like a trading card pack's supposed to. So I got one to crack open and put it in 9 pocket sleeves, and I've got one that is still sealed in the wrapper. So I think I got everything that I could have gotten from the Kickstarter without having to deal with all the Kickstarter nonsense and having to give my information and have them shipped to me and all that kind of good stuff. If it comes down to that, where I just have to catch them at a regional con, that gives me a reason to travel around and hit cool, unique cons. So, but also I think it's a situation where since I get to travel the next, you're going to probably have to put together a list of, hey, can you get me these regional things that just are not available? And it's like, yeah, I'll put them in the suitcase. I'll bring them over to you.
Gotcha. I need the loo quickly. Do you want to wrap up, or shall I use the loo and then we resume?
I think my gal's probably going to want dinner pretty soon, so it's probably a good idea to wrap. The funny thing is, we did end up talking about art stuff like I thought we were going to, but one thing I was thinking, because I was just trying to okay, what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk, but what are we going to talk about specifically?
Let me use the loo, and I'm going to call you Frank because I don't know your real name. Let me use the loo. I'll be 2 seconds.
Well, I'll tell you what, don't worry about it. There's nothing we have to actually talk about right now. I'll go ahead and let you go. Okay. You can use loo, and I'll get back with you some of the stuff by text that I would have going to do verbally.
Cool. All right.
So anyway,
you take it easy.
Always a pleasure. Take care. Don't burst. Talk to you later.
Bye.
Thanks to Adam Michael Smith, Between the Pages blog, Billy Hynes, Comics Enabler, who wrote, "Look, me and Frank talk comics. A good time had by all." Well, us anyway. He spoke to the Graffiti Designs Martial Law hardcover from the 90s. Since we spoke, he got a copy. There's a tear on the jacket, but from the estate sale of O'Neill via Gosh in London. Carrying on, Chris Dunford, DC Dave, Del Dracula, Derek WC wrote, "Surreal to hear Billy talking about his mate that reps Bolland, because while we're not mates, I've met him a few times and bought art from him, and he was a really nice dude with great stuff on his site. Also had a brief but fun chat with Alan Davis recently when getting Detective Comics number 570 signed about a story of how that was his first cover art that was shown on television on the BBC, but the news topic was pornography in comics. So we had a chuckle over that. Oh, this is Derek, lol." And more at Teal Productions, Eugene R. Hendricks, voice actor, home studio, Gas, Illegal Machine, who wrote, "I don't have time to go through your unsorted box would be the most savage breakup line ever." The Irredeemable Shag, J. Alex Morrissey, Tradecraft Podcast, Jean Bernard Francois, JMT Productions, Julie Raoul, Keith G. Baker, King Dinosaur, Mary Rose, Michael, who wrote great episode, Moody Machan, Relatively Geeky Podcast Network, Richard Field, Talk Nerdy to Me, the show, and Unpronounceable Wink.
Mother, tell your children not to walk my way. Tell your children not to hear my words, what they mean, what they say. Mother, mother, can you keep them in the dark for life? Can you hide them from the waiting world? Oh, mother, father, gonna take your daughter out tonight. Gonna show her my world. Oh, father, not about to see your light. But if you wanna find hell with me, I can show you what it's like. Till you're bleeding, not about to see your light. But if you wanna find hell with me, I can show you what is.